want to welcome you to one of the most remarkable journeys you will ever take. Come and join me as we walk the corridors of the mythological dragons and beasts of St. John's Revelation. During the 3rd century after the crucifixion of Christ, the powerful bishops and Arians came into debate on the floor of Constantinople under the guardianship of Constantine. Constantine was a Christian king, and he wanted a nation that was not divided. Thus, at the end of the debate, the Arians lost and their work was relegated to the Dark Ages. The bishops, however, knowing that humanity was illiterate, that they thought the world was the center of the universe, felt that the secret teachings of Christianity could not be given. To quote one of the early bishops, it would be like giving a weapon into the hands of a child. Among these secret teachings was the mysteries of St. John's Revelation. A new age has dawned now, and for the first time in the history of the manuscript, every single symbol will be broken and every mystery will be revealed to you. I am your hostess, Elizabeth MacDonald-Burrows. Hello, and welcome to another episode. We're getting closer and closer to that final one. And that's where we go into the subconscious mind for the final purification of the soul. I don't think we'll get there today, but we're coming close to that final and last battle. And then, of course, the good part is we get to enjoy the victory and watch the new Jerusalem and know what our world is going to be like in the world of tomorrow. In the meantime, I think we left off here with chapter 14. Again, I hope you have your trusty King James, and those of you who have Odyssey of the Apocalypse, that you have one of these. And Odyssey of the Apocalypse is page 88, and of course in your scripture it's 14. And we covered 5, 6, and 7 as we began to talk about there was a correlation between the 3 angels and the dragon and the 2 beasts. Remember, the dragon represented the centeredness of self-will or ego. Then we had the ego feeds the mind and the mind feeds the body. These angels are not any different. There's a correlation between these two. And so he talks about that if we can start with 6. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. And we talked about the everlasting gospel is the gospel of truth. Truth is not something which is different between you and I, but truth is something which we each perceive at different levels. As we grow upward, our understanding of a truth begins to grow also. And as a result of this, when we get to the top of the ladder, on whatever that truth may be, then we see the same truth. So truth is unchanging. And when it talks about the everlasting gospel, it's really talking about the fact that this world will go through this transformational change, and that someday the human world will wear semi-light, semi-material bodies. But they must first go through the resurrection of the dead. And that is, if you remember, the resurrection of the indwelling Christ that is in us. So it is saying that there will come a time when we will all see the same truth. If you have studied very many religions or philosophies and science, you already know that there is a thread of truth that runs through all religions, that seems to tie them together. I am often accused of teaching Eastern, but I say to people when they say this, but truth runs through all religions, and you're only seeing the similarity. I cannot help but remember, though, an incident that took place when I was perusing and comparing East and West religion. when I was listening to a Swami, and this particular Swami happened to be one of the greatest Vedantic scholars in all of India. And a Vedantic scholar means studying a student of the scriptures of India. And someone, he made this bold statement. He said, all the great masters come from the East. So of course someone raised their hand and said, asked, what about Jesus? And I remember the Swami just looked at him. He said, Jesus was Eastern. And this takes me to another story when I was once lecturing. And a man came in with his prayer group, a minister, and he had come in late, so they hadn't heard the first part of the lecture. And of course, at the time when we had question-answer, they were very exuberant in asking their questions, as they usually are. And finally, because other people were not getting the attention that they really needed, I got somewhat exasperated. And I looked at him and I said, remember, Jesus was not Christian, of which he acknowledged that Jesus wasn't. Of course, Christianity is the religion that formed after Jesus walked upon earth. But Jesus himself was not a Christian. He is simply one who bore the Christ. So when we talk about this everlasting truth, we find it in all of the great masters. Jesus taught truth. John the Beloved is teaching truth. And John, of course, obviously feels that his primary focus on mission upon earth was to leave for us the information regarding the resurrection of the dead. So every nation and every kindred, every tongue and every people will one day have no religious barriers or no barriers between science and philosophy, because truth is science, religion, philosophy, and intuition. It's all of these combined. He said, saying in a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and fountains of water. And of course that's the number one rule for those that would really like to open the doorway to this tremendous resurrection and transformational change, is to follow Jesus' first commandment, and that is to love God. And in loving God, that doesn't mean being on our knees every minute and praying to him, although that is one way. It means really sharing our life with the Lord of the universe. And in that, there's an integral part of him in each of us, that he has endowed us with a part of himself, which is referred to as his Son. We therefore have a pipeline to the whole. And so from this standpoint of view, we know that to love God and to love each other is the key to a happy world and a world of tomorrow. So, and there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, the great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. We won't go into Babylon again. We did go into it somewhat in the last episode, and we are going to go into it more deeply when we go into the harlot of Rome, when we have, I think that's about chapter 17. And so the third angel followed them saying, before I go on, yes, I'm sorry. I will say that what it is speaking of in Babylon is the fact that it was felt that because there were so many people of so many different nationalities that became so involved in wealth and power, that this caused the destruction, because this was a violation of natural and cosmic law. So it was deemed that because Babylon had detoured from the ways of God, that this is what brought the destruction. So that's why John uses it here, because it is the soul having become enmeshed into the world of matter that certainly has brought its complications and its problems and its desolation. So, and the third angel followed, saying, if any man worship the beast and his image and receive the mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath. We talked about this being cause and effect, that anyone, and the mark of the beast, of course, and his image was the worship of the physical world, the ego-centered world of power and money and all of this. It's not wrong to have money. It's not wrong to be fed or to not be hungry. But we do have to keep in mind that we have homeless and we have starving. And a part of what we do should go to help those that are less fortunate than ourselves. And each of us has to evaluate what our tithing will be. But we all should help those that, because they're God's children too. And we sometimes forget this. So it is simply saying when we follow this way, we have to drink of the law of cause and effect. A person has bought a yacht. They're a millionaire. They have stock. Then the stock market falls and they're in poverty overnight. And they may go and take their life. So this is an effect of a cause. And this is why it is saying that God's wrath will follow. Meaning certainly that illness and sorrow and old age and pain are all those things that we have to bear when we are in following the path of the ego, our self-will. And so the same will drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone. Of course, fire is purification, and brimstone is the hot ashes. Everything is smoldered and burnt up. And that would be in the presence of the holy angels and the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascended up forever and ever. And they have no rest day or night who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receives the mark of his name. Whoever walks in darkness, remember we said the mark was really a black mark, meaning darkness and unknowingness and ignorance. And when it talks about the smoke of their torment went up forever and ever, it's talking about as long as they follow self-will, the corporeal will, which leads them into the path of temptation, into the path of power and corruption and things like this. And so as long as we are bound by this, now we can be divine or give birth to that divine rather, and still work in the corporeal world without having the retaliation, because we work in harmony with natural and cosmic law, or with the will of God. So, and here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and have faith in Jesus. And I like that because Jesus, of course, has always been my ideal, and I have never found in his teaching anything which has not made man better. So if we can keep the commandment of God, which, if you remember Moses and the laws, love the Lord thy God. And that was also Jesus' first commandment. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, blessed are the dead, which die in the Lord. And I don't know how people have missed this. Blessed are the dead, which die in the Lord from henceforth. Meaning he has been resurrected. The soul of its self-will dies as it becomes intermingled and in unitive state with the divine nature in it. Yea, said the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their words do follow them. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. I think that's about where we left off. We said that cloud is that which means obscurity. And many people are waiting for Jesus to come out there somewhere in the heavens, riding on a cloud someday, and feeling that every eye will see him. I think that he would have to ride on the cloud throughout the world for everyone to see him. But what it really means is the Christ, the indwelling Christ, will come from the clouds of illusion, will come riding one day or walking one day, and suddenly there he is. And he has a golden crown, means he is ruler. It says in Revelation, remember, that unto him God has given all power. So this means that it is up to that part of God in us to that Son of God, to the Christ, to do the purification, because all power is given to him. So he's the one that's going to reap. So he has this sickle, and he's going out, and he's going to separate the wheat from the chaff. And by this means he's going to separate the good in us and help us to annihilate and destroy that which is bad in us, that part which causes us to hate and to be in discord with other people. And he that sat upon the cloud thrust the sickle into earth, and the earth was reaped. To me, this is when the period of when the soul begins its journey into the purification of matter. Not just the purification of the body, but the purification of all the relationships that it's had on earth and all the family relationships that exist around them. One of the first requirements of the Christ is that the physical world be purified, meaning that we first tie up all the loose ends of our family, heal all relationships before we can really continue on. And we know he is speaking of the healing of the earth, because he has put his sickle into the earth and has reaped. If we gave it more like John gave it when he came to me in Hawaii, it would sound kind of like this, and it's so beautiful and eloquent. And I looked, and behold, I saw the overshadow of the indwelling Christ, and his wisdom ruled over the soul. He carried a sharp sickle in his hand for reaping. And another angel came out of the inner temple, crying with a loud voice to him, saying, "Thrust your sickle deep into the soul. Its fruits are ripe, and the time has come to reap, for she is to be prepared for the holy marriage to the Lamb." And the indwelling Christ thrust his sickle into the soul's corporeal nature and began to reap. We're now on verse 17. And another angel came out of the temple, which is in heaven, and he also had a sharp sickle. Now this one, if you remember, we had the dragon, self-will. We had two beasts, which was the mind and which was the body. This one here is, of course, going to purify the mind. So, and another angel, and as I go opposite to this, it said, and another angel came out of the holy temple, which is in heaven, the spiritual nature of mankind. And he also had a sharp sickle for the purification of the mind. We have been through a lot of purification of the mind, but we must continue until love has replaced hate, until understanding has overcome judgment, and until compassion rules over the heart. And another angel came from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sickle, saying, "Thrust in your sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine from the earth, for her grapes are ripe." And we talked about this once before, why the grapes were used. Jesus used it as a symbol, and so does John. And that's because the grapes would be placed in the wine press. People in the old days used to get in with bare feet and crush the grapes, and out would come, out of these huge wine presses, and out would come this pure juice, which would then be fermented and made into fine wine. And this was necessary in Israel because during the season of non-rain, the water became very sparse. And so wine was rather the drink of the day. And so out came this beautiful wine. And this is what happens to the soul as it's purified by the Christ. It's kind of as though the husk or body and worldly ways are washed away from it, while the soul is pressed and made into fine wine. So the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine from earth and cast it into a great wine press of the wrath of God. meaning, of course, God really is not a wrathful God. He never gets angry. He is always ever patient. He loves everyone, as we've talked about before. He loves everyone for exactly what they are, and he doesn't condemn. He knows that they must learn their lessons, and he helps to give them the strength to endure the lessons that they have to learn. But he does not take them away. So the wrath means merely we're gaining the effect of the cause, the things that we have done. I talked in a counseling session to a woman yesterday who went on and on about the dysfunctional life that she lived and how tremendously abusive people were to her. And I know that the reason this happens is because we look at it that way. I made a decision a long time ago. We either all come from dysfunctional homes or we all come from perfect homes. That light in us incarnates us, brings us into embodiment for certain lessons. That only into the situation in which we are born can we learn the lessons which we're supposed to learn. So how can we blame anyone for anything that happens to us when it has been the will of the light to bring us into the embodiment, to learn lessons? Maybe tomorrow this woman will be a psychologist, and all these experiences and suffering she did will give her the understanding and compassion that she needs. So I look upon life as having given everything that is needed in order to bring us to the feet of God and to help us to fulfill the greatness that's inside of our soul. The winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto horse bridles, by the space of 1,006 furlongs. And of course 1,000 is the body, soul, and spirit, having returned to the one. And 600 furlongs means the spirit and the soul are being released from the bondage of the sixth cycle of human progression. In other words, human, because from human into the seventh epoch, man becomes divine. As it came so long ago, the angel thrust his sickle into the experiences of the soul's journey through matter and cast it into a great winepress to separate the corporeal nature, the skin, from that which is divine, the wine. And the winepress which separated the purity of the soul from its corporeal enchantments continued to be trod, and the mind, which was the horse, became as blood under the governorship of the indwelling Christ, which is the bridle, for a space of 1,600 furlongs, that Christ and his soul counterpart become one and are freed from the bondage of matter. Thomas Henry Huxley wrote something that I read many years ago, and I could not help but conclude this particular chapter with that quote. He said, "The chessboard is the world. The pieces are the phenomena of the universe. The rules of the game are what we call the laws of nature. The player on the other side is hidden from us. We know that his play is always fair, just, and patient. But we also know, to our cost, that he never overlooks a mistake or makes the smallest allowance for ignorance." Thomas Henry Huxley. Before we go on to chapter 15, which I have nicknamed kind of the seven plagues, we're finally going to get into the seven angels that unloose their final vials. And if you remember, I said it was always so interesting that John only spent 4 verses in explaining the horses of the apocalypse, and he spent about a chapter and a half covering the seventh angel. So there must be a reason for this. Therefore, I'm going to set it aside for a while because I think it's about time that we have another story about John. And many of you may not know so much about how he died. We have to go to the Apocrypha to some degree in order to gain that story. John, of course, died as a very old man. He was one of the very few that was not martyred. In fact, when I wrote Harp of Destiny on the life of Christ, I put in the back of it a kind of memoriam to Jesus of those that had served him. And some of you might be curious about this, and so I'll stop here just for a moment because John is one of these. And then we will go into the story of how John died. But John the Baptist, of course, was the son of Zacharias and Elizabeth, was a cousin to Jesus of Nazareth, John the Beloved, James the Great, James the Less, and James the Just. And we have shown in the past, in Mystic Christianity, the lineage of Jesus. And we are speaking of cousins, being Elizabeth, of course, was the daughter of Anna, Anna and Joachim were Jesus' grandmother and grandfather, and Anna had a sister, Bianca, and Bianca gave birth to Elizabeth. Elizabeth gave birth to John the Baptist. So it was a cousin. And of course, James the Great and John the Beloved were born of Mary, Jesus' mother's sister, whose name was also Mary, the youngest, Mary the Younger, and who gave birth to John the Beloved and James the Great. And then, of course, James the Less and James the Just were half-brothers that were Joseph's older children when he was a widower, when he became a spouse to Mary. John the Beloved, the son of course, Mary's Salome and Zebedee, was a brother to James the Great, a cousin to Jesus of Nazareth, and he served imprisonment on the Isle of Patmos under the edict of Domitian. He died of natural causes in the service of God, and he was actually about 90 years old. And when they had to carry him in the last days of his life, his disciples, and he would say to them, and I can almost see this happening because he was such a sweet and gentle man. He would say, "Remember, little children, love one another. Remember, little children, love one another." James the Great, of course, was John the Beloved's brother, and he was, of course, a son of Mary's Salome and Zebedee, and brother of John. And of course, he was, of course, a cousin to James the Just, and so on. He was slain by sword at the command of Herod. Simon, who was called Peter, the son of Jonas, the brother of Andrew, was a native of Bethsaida. He was crucified, head downward, in Rome, under the edict of Nero. Andrew, the son of Jonas, brother of Simon Peter, native of Bethsaida, he was scourged and crucified by the Agiates at Trey under the edict of Agrippa. He was also, yes, and then Philip was originally a disciple of John the Baptist, and he was a brother of Miriam, native of Bethsaida. He was stoned and crucified at Hierapolis, a city of Phrygia. Matthew, son of Mary and Alphaeus, brother of James and the Less, and cousin to Jesus, he died in a natural death in the service of God. And we had James, of course, the Less, a half-brother to Jesus, he was a brother of Matthew, I'm so sorry, and cousin to Jesus of Nazareth, James the Less. He was the son of Mary and Alphaeus. And he was hurled from a pinnacle in the temple in his death in AD 62. Thomas, called Didymus, native of Antioch, was imprisoned in India and taken to a mountain where he was pierced by spears until dead. Thaddeus, a Hebrew, originally a disciple of John the Baptist, died of natural causes in Beirut in the service of God. James the Just, the first bishop of Jerusalem, who was Jesus' half-brother, the son of Joseph and the stepson of Mary of Nazareth, he was stoned to death by the order of Ananus, a high priest of the Sanhedrin. And it was, of course, Ananus was one of the two priests that ordered the crucifixion of Jesus. Rome has been blamed many times. Pilate has been blamed many times for the crucifixion of Jesus. But actually Pilate, as I read a transcript, a translation of the court trial, Pilate actually pled rather a brilliant defense. As long as he could hold out, he, in the end, had to admit that Caesar was his ruler and not God. But anyway, Ananus, the Jewish priest, a high priest of the Sanhedrin, they were the real culprits who brought about the death of Jesus. Simon the Zealot, the Canaanite, a native of Cana of Galilee, was crucified by the Romans at Castor, Lincolnshire, under the edict of Radisticanius. Nathaniel Bartolome, which we call Bartholomew, but Nathaniel Bartolome, originally a disciple of John the Baptist, was flayed alive and crucified head downward in Armenia. Paul, the son of Tarsus, Pharisee, and he, of course, he was converted after the crucifixion of Jesus. He was chained and beheaded under the edict of Agrippa. And Joseph of Arimathea, who was a member of the Sanhedrin and was an uncle to Mary of Nazareth and the great uncle of Jesus, died in Israel. He was exiled from Israel and died of natural causes on English soil after founding the first church of Britain. And of course with him was Mary Magdalene, forced in exile, Mary Magdalene and Martha and Lazarus. And Mary Magdalene died in Aix, Gaul, and Lazarus was crucified also head downward when he tried to convert the powerful Celtics. And that is found, of course, in the English Royal Library of England, in some of the research there. So most of these were martyred, but John was not one of them. He lived to the ripe age of 90 years old, and I like to take that last day. It is known by people who no longer fear death at the time, approximate the time that they're going to die. And when we talk about no fear of death, we're talking about the realization that we are immortal, eternal, and that our body is nothing more than a suit of clothes that we wear, and when we have worn it out, we shed it. I have a reasonable good idea of when my time is to be, and therefore it does not surprise me that some of these great masters knew right even to the hour. When we think in terms of Aaron, the mouthpiece of Moses, he went up to Mount Hor. Moses went with him, and Aaron took his robes, priestly robes off, and put them on his son Eleazar, and then bid farewell to the people. And Moses, that was when Moses said, "There will come one like unto me." He told the people of Israel, the Israelites, "There will come one like unto myself, and to him you will listen." And then we have Moses, when he came to his death, there was so much moaning and crying and carrying on that it formed such a heavy burden upon him that when they came to the base of the mountain, he asked the people please not to go any further. And he took Joshua, who would lead the children of Israel into the promised land, and Eleazar, who was then high priest, and went up the mountain, asking only God that he could see the end of the journey of which God showed him. And then he died. There are two stories of Moses' death. One is that his body disintegrated. They couldn't find it, in other words. Another one, of course, that they took his body to bury in the home of his ancestors. I can't tell you which one of those is right, but nevertheless, the deaths of these great masters are always very magnificent, and John knew when he was supposed to die. So shall we join him on that last and final day when he made his last journey? After he break the bread, John is with his disciples, and of course those that have loved Jesus, and he has broken the bread, And he gave it to all of them. And he prayed over each one of the brethren that he might be worthy of the grace of the Lord. And then he partook also, likewise, and said, Unto me also there be a part with you, and peace be with you, my beloved. And of course, peace, when he said, Peace be with you, my beloved, it was almost as if not only a blessing from Jesus, but Jesus was also John's beloved. And so after that he said to Verus, Take with you some, and I'm going to leave out the these and thous because it's more interesting. After that he said to Verus, Take with you some 2 men and baskets and shovels, and follow me. And Verus without delay did as he was bidden by John, who was the servant of God. And the blessed John therefore went out of the house and walked forth of the gates, having told the major part of those that followed him, like Moses. He asked them to depart. And you may wonder why this is so, but we are all one. When we have around us a group of people in deep grief, the heaviness upon the soul is tremendous. And so by being able to go off into some kind of isolation alleviates some of the burden of the grieving. So John, like Moses, had told the mass, most of his disciples, that they should stay behind. And when he came to a tomb of a certain brother of ours, and believe me, I certainly would like to know who that was, but he said to the young man, Dig, my children. And they dug. And he was with them yet more, saying, Let the trench be deeper, because, of course, they were digging his burial plot. And as they dug, he spoke to them the word of God and told them that were with him, edifying and to perfect them unto the greatness of God. In other words, let us perfect ourselves and edify God. And he prayed again over all those that were with him. And when the young men had finished the trench as he desired, we knowing nothing of it, he took off his garments, where he was clad, and laid them, as it were, a pallet in the bottom of the trench. And standing in his shift only, and that would be a simple white apron style that was so common among, I'm sure, among the Jewish people and Hebrew people, but it's also a common attire of the Essenes. Just a straight apron kind of slid up each side and then kind of tied at the neck. And standing in his shift only, he stretched his hands upward and he prayed. And we learn something about his life, I think, here. He said, "O you that did choose us for the apostleship of the Gentiles, O God that sent us into the world, that you did reveal yourself by the law of the prophets, that you never rest, but always from the foundation of the world saved them that were able to be saved, that you made yourself known through all of nature and proclaimed yourself even among the beasts, that you did make desolate and savage so tame and quiet." And of course, John went through the resurrection of the dead. And that is what happens, a soul which is in such torment. And when we talk about torment, we talk about mental indigestion and stress, and all of this comes to peace and tranquility. And that you gave yourself to it when it was a thirst for your words. Like John said, you gave yourself to my soul when I was thirsting for your words. And you did appear to it in haste when it was dying, and you did show yourself to it as a law when it was sinking into lawlessness like the earth. You came to it, you showed yourself as a law functioning through matter. And you manifested yourself when it had been vanished by darkness and unknowing, and you overcame its adversary when it fled from you, that gave your hand and did raise up from the things of darkness and unknowing, and you did not leave it to walk after bodily sort, but did show it to its own enemy, and have made for knowledge to thee, O God, the Father of them that are above the heavens, the Lord of them that are in the heavens, the law of them that are in the ethers, and the course of them that are in the air, and the keeper of them that are on the earth, and fear of them that are under the earth, meaning those that have gone to such darkness that they live not even the ways of humans. The grace of them that are your own, receive also the soul of your John, which it may be accounted worthy of you, you who kept me for this hour for thyself. And here as he speaks, he's also praying to Jesus and to God. He said, O you who kept me until this hour for thyself, untouched by union with a woman, who, when in my youth I desired to marry, did appear to me and say, John, I have need of you, who did prepare for me also a sickness of the body, who, when for the third time I would marry, did forthwith prevent me. And then at the third hour of the day you said to me, John, if you had not been mine, I would have suffered you to marry, who for 2 years did blind me or afflict my eyes, and grant me to mourn and entreat thee, who in the 3rd year did open my eyes of my mind. And in this case, I think he's speaking of the dark night of the soul, not the blindness of the eyesight or the human eyes, because when he speaks on the 3rd year, it's kind of like the spiritual senses having been opened. And also grant me my visible eyes. I guess he had both the blindness. So when I saw clearly, did ordain that it should be grievous for me to look upon a woman, who did save me from the temporal fantasy and lead me into that which endureth always. Again, this stresses, I believe, still more of a spiritual awakening rather than blindness of eyes, but he does mention his eyes, so that possibility, of course, did exist. Who did rid me of the foul madness that is in the flesh, who did take from me the bitter death and establish me in thee alone, who did muzzle the secret disease of my soul. Here he talks about the disease of the soul, and I'm thinking he's speaking of that resurrection where the soul is purified, or the subconscious regions of the soul are purified. And did afflict and banish that which raised the tumult in me, who did make my love for thee spotless, and did make my joining you perfect and unbroken, who did give me undoubting faith in you, who did order and make clear my inclination towards you, you who give to every man the due reward of his works, who did put in my soul that I should have no possession except thee. For what is more precious than you? Now therefore, Lord, whereas I have accomplished the dispensation wherewith I was entrusted, account thou me worthy of rest, and grant me that end in thee, which is salvation unspeakable and unutterable. And what he is talking about in the transition, when the corporeal body at last is left behind, the soul who has passed through the resurrection of the dead is now one in the light, and can enjoy the fullness of that unitive state at the time of death. So he said, grant me that end in thee, which is salvation unspeakable and unutterable. And as I come to you, let the fire go backwards, let darkness be overcome, let the gulf be without strength, let the furnace die out, and let Gehenna be quenched. Let angels follow and devils fear, let rulers be broken, let powers fall. Let the places of thy right hand stand fast, and let them of the left hand not remain. Remember, we talked about the left hand meant in the old days, the unrighteous, and the right hand represented the righteous, or the servants of God. Grant me to accomplish the journey to you without suffering, insolence, or provocation, and to receive that which you have promised unto them that live purely, and who have loved thee only. And then, having sealed himself on every part, very much the motion of the Catholic in today's world, having sealed himself at every part, he stood and said, Thou art with me, O Lord Jesus Christ. And then he laid himself down in the trench where he had strewn his garments, and having said unto us, Peace be with you, brethren, he gave up his spirit, rejoicing. And the next day they went, of course, to prepare his body. We brought a linen cloth and spread it about him and went to the city. And on the day following we went forth, but we found not his body, for it was translated by the power of the Lord Jesus Christ. And translated, of course, means disintegrated or dissolved. Another said that on the morrow we dug in the place, and him we found not, but only his sandals, and the earth moving, springing up like a well. And after that we remembered that which was spoken by the Lord and by Peter. So now we bid, I guess we bid farewell to some of the historical aspects of John as we prepare for the last 7 chapters, beginning with chapter 15. Those last 7 chapters, great chapters of the Apocalypse itself. So chapter 15, I call it the 7 plagues. We're going to deal with 7 angels. They are the 7 angels of cosmic law. We are preparing for the in-depth purification of the soul now, because these angels will not only come upon the body and the mind for cleansing, but also upon the deep levels of the subconscious mind. Many things that motivate us are things that we have seen and heard even as infants. We have long since forgotten them, but they have ruling over us. And now everything that is hidden in the soul, every memory pattern, all this of childhood and things like this that is important, that has need of purification, is now going to be brought to the surface and to be purified. I chose the scripture to illustrate the chapter of the 7 plagues to be Corinthians 1, 12 and 13. I really like Paul's writing, because Paul entered the resurrection of the dead after his conversion on the road to Damascus. And the early Paul was still very much Saul, and the ego was out very much. But the later writings, when Paul was imprisoned, after the years had passed, and he had gained the affection of the other disciples, some of those are some very, very beautiful truths are interwoven in the messages that Paul left. He said, For by one Spirit are we all baptized into one body, whether we be Jews or Gentiles, whether we be bond or free, and have all been made to drink into one Spirit. So he too talks about the oneness of all mankind, that we are all in God and God is in us, and there is but one God, and that we separate ourselves by beliefs only. And of course this one is considered the shortest, I believe the shortest of all of the chapters in the Apocalypse. How was good luck, maybe we'll get through it just once, and instead of having a cliffhanger, who knows? Let's go to the first verse. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled the wrath of God. And here's what I say, oops, 7 last, these angels, each one is going to have an effect of purifying, a final purification of the soul. And I saw, as it were, a sea of glass mingled with fire. And them that had gotten victory over the beast and his image and over his mark and over the number of his name stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God. And we told you that harp in the old days represented the flow of music through the strings, or was it emulated the flow of the Spirit of God through the person or the soul. And so now that we have the sign in heaven, and we have seven last plagues and 7 last angels, the sea of glass means it's like a reflection. Earth is a reflection of heaven, and that we can see clearly from heaven to earth, but not so clearly from earth to heaven. And here, standing in the heavenly consciousness doesn't mean they have died of their physical body and they're looking down from heaven, although we do have lots of angels that do that. But these are also mean those that are in the higher state of consciousness, who have achieved that resurrection of the dead, who walk not of earth, but in it, with their consciousness beyond. So they have, and of course they have harps and sing of the praises of God. And they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, "Great and marvelous are your works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are the ways, thou King of saints. Who shall not fear thee, O Lord, and glorify your name?" And there's only one reason that we have any fear of God, because God is certainly not something to be feared. But we fear the violation of his law, because we know that as we trespass or violate it, that we will reap the reprisal, so that the lesson is learned. So we try very hard not to do this, so that we're in harmony with natural and cosmic law, and we can have peace and happiness. So glorify thy name, for thou only art holy. For all nations shall come and worship before thee, for thy judgments are made manifest. The effect of the cause are made manifest. And it is true that all nations of this world shall be of one mind one day, and we shall all worship the one God. And after that I looked, and behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened. And once again, this is the opening of the soul to that divine plan in which the Christ has opened it for the receiving of cosmic consciousness, the consciousness of God, in which all visions and revelations come from. And the 7 angels came out of the temple, so we know John is in cosmic consciousness. He's in that the accelerated or ascended state of consciousness. And he is seeing inwardly the holy temple open. And the 7 angels came out of the temple, having the 7 plagues, clothed in pure white linen, having their breasts girded with golden girdles. And we have talked about before that linen is kind of like the grape that is in the wine press. The flax seed would be retched, and out of it is made the fine thread. And that all of those entering the resurrection of the dead, it was common for them to wear the white garments of purity, and of course girded with golden girdles, girded with wisdom. So whatever they're going to bring to us means that it's going to teach us lessons and bring us great wisdom as a result of their pouring the vials. And one of the 4 beasts gave unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials. Again, that means wisdom, golden wisdom, full of the wrath of God, who live forever and ever. Meaning then these vials contain in them that which is going to purify anything that is left yet impure. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power. And no man was able to enter the temple until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. Because we cannot ever expect to enter into the accelerated and ascended state of consciousness until we have passed through the resurrection of the dead. And most of all, I think it's important to know that we can do this without having to lose the body. Remember when Jesus said that he lived in earth but not of it? That is the way of the resurrection. I'll be back with you next week, and thank you for joining me. I want to thank you for being with us during this exciting journey into St. John's Apocalypse. Jesus once said, "There shall be no peace among people till there be one garden of the brotherhood over earth." So come, let you and I work together for this common cause, that the great age of mankind can come into existence. Until we meet again, peace be with you.